Welcome to the podcast about Tatars in Poland. I am Maurits Berger, Professor of Islam in the West at Leiden University in the Netherlands.
And I am Ewa Górska, an assistant professor at the Digital Justice Center at the University of Wrocław in Poland. Together we'll explore the history, identity and traditions of the Tatars, the Muslim minority that has lived in Poland for around 600 years. Our quest will take us to remote parts of Poland, but also into libraries and into meetings with Tatars from all walks of life.
Our question is, who are the Tatars in Poland and how do they carve out their lives in Polish society? And is Islam here in Poland different from somewhere else? These are more than academic questions. There are also questions about the ways that Muslims are part of Europe.
This is episode 2, The Tourists.
We spent 6 hours driving from Gdansk to
Kruszyniany.
Okay, we'll work on that. But it's all the way to the east, near the border of Belarus. And it's also a drive where we got to know each other better. Because that's the funny thing. We briefly met during a conference a year ago in Krakow, and there we came up with the idea to make this podcast. And after that, we only had contact by Zoom and mail, and on several instances we asked each other, are you still in for this? Are we really going to do this? And yes, we were. Because we share a keen interest and curiosity in the world and the history of the Tatars. And we wanted to explore that. And there was a mutual benefit. I do not speak or read Polish, and therefore I have no access to people or to the Polish research. Ewa does. And she has a network of contacts, and with I do not know how many calls and mails, has managed to set up a whole range of meetings. What I bring into this project is a broad knowledge of Islam in Europe. And I have two qualities that will help to open the doors in the Tatar communities. I'm a foreigner, and I do have a title of a professor. So it turns out that we make a good team. But we did not know each other personally before we met here in Poland and started this road trip. One thing we had in common was our love for Arab music. So on the long drives to the eastern borderlands of Poland, we switched taking the wheel and playing our favorite songs. We should have played Polish Tatar music, of course, but this has been lost in time. It is now being reconstructed and played in modernized versions, and we will play some of it during this podcast series. But today, when we are driving across eastern Poland, we prefer Arab music, even if it does not match with the February landscape of Polish flatlands. But it got us to Kruszyniany.
Kruszyniany.
I'm going to work on this. And it made us getting to know each other.
عليك مني السلام يا أرض أجدادي ففيك طاب المقام وطاب إنشادي.
Okay, we're here. Do you see the mosque? It's over there, right on your right, under those trees there.
You mean that small wooden building with those two little towery things on top? It looks like a church.
It does, right? So it looks like that for a reason. The Tatar community in the 18th century, when they needed or wanted to build a mosque for themselves, they actually had no craftsmen who would know how to build a mosque or how a mosque looks like elsewhere. So they hired local builders who were Christians, Orthodox Christians, and would usually build wooden churches. I'm just gonna park here. There's a parking spot next to a Tatar center. We parked and of course I lost my train of thought. If it was important, it will come back, right? Anyway, we're very hungry, so let's eat at the local Tatar restaurant first and get back to it later.
It's like we walked into a tourist trap. And I feel a little bit cheated. It's a beautiful village. Most of the houses are refurbished, done really nicely, sometimes a little bit too nice. And we are in a very big place where we are to meet someone. Everything is with Tatar paraphernalia, Tatar cuisine. Everything is Tatar. They have a Tatar yurt outside. And it's packed with tourists. Polish tourists from his families and elderly couples and young hikers with photo cameras. And well, let's see how this works out. Opposite the mosque is a Tatar center that has a small museum and a cafeteria. It is busy, but Ewa had arranged for an interview with the owner, Janetta. We first have lunch in the large cafeteria together with all the other tourists. And when they have left, Janetta joins us at our table.
Tutaj nie ma co ukrywać, że my jako mniejszość etniczna, etnograficzna nawet, przetrwaliśmy dzięki religii.
Ewa and Janetta talk over an hour in Polish. Out of politeness, I look attentive, but I do not understand a word they say.
Przed wojną nasza społeczność była niewielka, choć przed wojną
Janetta tells me about her family history, the migration of Tatar people after the World War II, her parents born in today's Belarus and Lithuania, but that were Polish territories before the war, and then about how their families repatriated to the so-called recovered lands in the west of today's Poland, which was Germany before the war. She talks about preserving the community through religion and culture, celebrating holidays, coming back to Polish Mecca and Medina. She means the mosques in Bohoniki and Kruszyniany, to meet each other, have picnics, visit the graves, organize the famous Tatar balls where the youth could meet each other. Anyways, it's a fascinating story, and Janetta is a born storyteller, but it is so full of details that I stopped even trying to translate word by word to Maurits. So he is sitting there trying to nod and smile, but I can see he is dying to know what we talk about. So when we leave, I go to translate and explain what we talked about.
When we are outside, Ewa gives me the brief version of her talk with Janetta. I ask Ewa why Janetta started this cultural center here. This 2-story high Tatar restaurant in a small village in far east Poland. It's packed mostly with Polish tourists. Some of them are local Tatars, so I was told, but I cannot tell the difference. Everyone there looked the same as Poles to me.
She's not from here. She moved in here. She's Tatar, but her family was transferred to the west of Poland after the war. She wasn't from here. She met her husband. She came back here. The village was dying. It was being depopulated. People were moving out. It's far away from the cities, far away from education, from money, from work. The land is no good for farming, really. But she came and she stayed with her husband's family, and then she's an outgoing person, likes to talk to people, which we've seen.
And heard.
And heard.
Yes.
She likes to talk. So she says she started talking to tourists who were coming, not so many, I guess, back then. And then by chance they were, for example, sitting at her home and talking over coffee, and her mother-in-law would call everyone for dinner, so they would try the food that was being, still cooked at homes. But there were no restaurants, like Tatar restaurants. And then slowly people were telling her, you should serve that to guests. And slowly, step by step, the business started. She was surprised by the success, but then the village got revived partly by that. But others
So
were
all of this
suspicious
because
as
of
well.
the energy of one woman,
Well,
in a way.
I believe in that actually.
Yeah.
But she also says it was the right moment. There was interest. There was media interest. So one interesting thing she said that everything changed 20 years ago. So after 9/11. So from what I understood, I didn't really want to ask another question, but I understood that the Islamophobia actually started then. And then people and media got interested in, we have this Tatar minority here. She mentioned one story. We will, I guess, have to look through it and maybe tell a short version of it. But so now, after 9/11, with all the Islamophobia also happening in the media, and the fear of Islam just, being blown out of proportion as well, there was at least one journalist from a prominent newspaper who said that Tatars should be deported because they are a ticking bomb inside the society. So what she says is that the good thing is that people reacted. His friends, colleagues from other journalists and other people reacted to defend the Tatars, because that was way out of line. Even if Islamophobia is actually allowed, tolerated in Polish media. So, they got attacked after 600 years. I think it was the moment of a bit of a shock. And they got attacked because they're Muslims as well. And then people started coming here and they were afraid. And she says groups are coming because there are other trails here, religious trails, for example, for Catholics. So they come to Sokółka. So sometimes some groups with priests would come here.
Sokółka is a place nearby.
Is a town nearby.
While Ewa tells me about her conversation with Janetta, we reach the famous green wooden mosque. We have a meeting with the custodian of the mosque who is waiting for us there. And his name is Jamil, typical Arabic name, but it's written in Polish with DZ, Jamil.
Pani będzie...
Tłumaczyła część, czyli zrobiła.
A pan to angielski posługuje się, nie? Angielski i niderlandzki? Nie.
No, tak.
Też?
Which language do you speak? It's apart from English. Well, Arabic, arabski.
Nie, to nie umiem. Uj, mama.
We're now in a mosque, and I think this is the most eastern part of European Union. It's right near the border of Belarus. It's a small wooden mosque. And the first thing that comes to mind when I walked in is the smell of wood. It's the smell of wood that is very dominant inside. It's quite different from what I'm used to in mosques. It's small. It's what is it? Less than 20 meters by, what would it be? 7 meters. And a small balcony. Everything is wood inside, kind of dark pine wood. And there's tapestry on the floor. Gifts also from the ambassador from Malaysia, I've been told. And the walls are covered with plates. Some are brought from the Hajj. The brother of the custodian 25 years ago brought them from the Hajj from Saudi Arabia. It's with beautiful calligraphy. It's the typical black, gold and silver calligraphy. And there are some hand-painted paintings of mosques, also with calligraphy. There's also some calligraphy made by people who obviously do not know Arabic. So that's more that they've been imitating drawings.
My obchodzimy święta Ramadan.
We celebrate the holidays like the Ramadan by Ram, which is the end of fasting. We have a prayer meeting here, and children are given money, sweets. In this region, we have the custom that families go to restaurants and have a Tatar feast, where we dance, together, of course, men and women, not separate. There used to be feasts organized by the Tatar nobility, a big party with dances. We also have the Day of Ashura, the Day of Atonement. I know this is something Shia and we are Sunni, but I do not know why we celebrate Ashura. There are various explanations for this. Anyway, part of Ashura is the story that when the sons of Ali died, the grandmother, upon hearing this in her grief and despair, mixed up the dishes. And therefore, in our tradition, the grandmothers make Ashura compote. It's made of 13 ingredients, an odd number, from dried fruits and rice. And yes, we know we have to pray 5 times a day, but we are not very strict in doing this. I would say that the older people, that is, the communist generation, rather not pray. It is the young who have started doing so, and also to start fasting again. I find it curious, because fasting is known to be difficult, but it's the young who are trying to do it.
No, pokolenie PRL-u to szło na łatwiznę, rezygnowało z używek, na przykład z papierosów czy z mięsa. Taki post ograniczony za miarę swoich możliwości.
While Jamil is talking, I walk around in a small mosque, looking at all the calligraphy artworks on the walls, and I ask the custodian where they came from. Some were brought by local Tatars who have been abroad, but most were presents from foreign Muslim visitors. It turns out that this little mosque, tucked away in the far corner of Europe, is quite famous in Muslim lands.
Miałem tu pielgrzymów i z Malezji, i z Indonezji, i z Pakistanu.
That's right. I have had pilgrims from Malaysia, Indonesia, Pakistan, and Uzbekistan who traveled around Europe. They come here to pray in the mosque. And yes, they find our customs strange. They would say that we should be more devout, pray 5 times a day, and they would suggest that I climb the minaret and make the call to prayer along with the imam. But they have accepted us. Even when I tell them that my wife is Catholic, and that my daughter is Catholic, and my son is a Muslim, they didn't ask or criticize me about it. They told me, "We know that you are a good man, a good person, you have a Catholic wife, but you talk so much about the mosque. You correct this image of bad Islam and terrorism. You educate people and do good work." One time I was sick and I could not open the mosque for foreign Muslims who wanted to pray, so my Catholic wife came and opened and closed the mosque, and they were surprised that Christians would want to open the mosque for Muslims to pray.
We thank Jamil and leave the mosque and walk around it into the forest towards the old Islamic cemetery.
Here we are. This is the cemetery. There's a wall of blocks around it. There's a new gate, something in Polish, but Ministry of Culture and Religious Affairs. Does it open? It does. This is impressive. Among the trees is stones. It's a kind of haphazardly strewn around. Some are, I wonder if they're even tombstones. No, they are. But it is from the 16th century onwards. So some of them are completely, anything that had been written on it has been erased. There are some completely covered in moss. And back there's the new ones. So we've been talking about Muslim minority all the time, or Tatar minority, and apparently you and I, we are talking about different things, right? So I mean, what does it mean to you when we talk about Muslim or Tatar minority?
So now when I'm thinking about it, I look at them, I guess, as at any other minority in Poland, but I think more like ethnic or national or ethnographic, as Janetta said, minority. So
But the thing is, they are also an ethnic minority, or at least they claim an ethnic background, right?
Yeah, and I think it's very important to them, but then the religion is also important as part of identity and being also a religious minority. But for me, we have many minorities, very also microscopic ones. And they are, I guess all of them to a certain extent at least, are trying to show their identity for themselves, maybe their children, but also sometimes to outsiders, a bit of a folklore. And then, for me, Tatars aren't, it won't sound right, but they aren't so special in this way. So it's just one of the many groups that we might think or might say that Poland is homogenic. It's not. So there are many other groups. And they have, so these elements of culture and tradition, it is a bit of a folklore. But then there is this aspect of being of different religion, which is on top of that, it's, for me, it's another twist, which is very interesting.
But wait, what is this twist? Because when we came here, you told me that this is a very interesting region because there's other religious minorities and ethnic and national minorities. So we passed some Orthodox churches. Orthodoxy is a minority here, and they are here. You said there's very small Jewish communities as well. They used to be here.
There used to be everywhere in Poland.
Of course. But
I'm not sure how it is right now, but definitely Belarusian national minority.
And there's Belarusian.
Strong here.
We passed a Belarusian restaurant on the way. And then, so how do the Tatars fit in? Let me tell you where I'm from. What's happening in at least in the Netherlands, but in quite a few of Western European countries, is that Muslims, the new generation of Muslims, are identifying themselves primarily as Muslims. Yes, they are of Moroccan or Bangladeshi or Turkish background, and they see that as a cultural heritage, but as disconnected from being a Muslim. And as opposed to their parents, for whom being a Moroccan or Turkish or Bangladeshi is the primary identity. So it is, but maybe it's also something that happens to migrants. I'm not really sure.
I think that's the difference, because here it's 600 years of history of being Polish and living in a country in which in different regions there were different minorities with different cultural backgrounds, with different strength, I would say, socially, to show where they come from, with different methods to support their identity and revive their heritage. And, you know, in some communities, at some moments, it works better. There is more interest, there is more energy, there is more money. And some are just less interested. It's also generational. And here we are starting to hear about it, about the generational
But why
change.
is it? Because so when we are visiting this particular place here, and there's others, what I see is they're really, I don't know another word of it, they're showing off. They're really proudly showing being
proud.
Tatar. Why don't just be a Tatar? Why do you have to show it this way? I mean, you have these new houses and restaurants and museums and all of that.
It might be post-communist syndrome,
Which means?
actually not being able to show it. So for decades, religion was privatized, and no one would actually show, especially this religious part. And here it's combined; you cannot dissolve it.
Do you see the same thing with the Catholics?
Yes.
Okay, so that may be
That's
a
why
post-communist
when we
thing.
were coming here, when we were driving here, we saw so many churches, some of them huge.
And new.
And new, pretty new, or a few decades old.
Beautiful and horrible architecture in all shapes and
horrible.
forms. Yes.
So,
so you think it's a typical
I would
post-communist thing. We were not allowed to be religious, and now we're going to show the world.
It's part of it. I guess it's partly because here with the Tatars we see it's the older generation that's actually trying to protect what's left and show it, and show that it might be important not only as a private matter but also in a social context.
They're the ones who have had the experience under communist rule.
Plus, they're also, I would say it's generational. So there is this moment in life when people are actually starting to get interested in their past. Personally, I see it when I'm in my 30s. And I think for a lot of my friends, this is something that happens at a certain point. We start to wonder where we came from. And I also see that, older generation might be more interested. They have more, they remember the history told by their parents, grandparents. They see it disappearing now, the community. There's less children and more people are getting married outside or more secular living in the country at all.
One thing keeps bugging me, and that is some of the religious rituals that the Tatars have. It is known that they were not strict with the headscarf and the use of alcohol, but this Ashura thing that they keep referring to, I find it fascinating. Because I only know it as a religious festival celebrated by Shiites. It's to commemorate the death of Hussein, the son of Ali, who were both the founding fathers, so to say, of the Shiite theology. So what are Tatars doing with that festival if they are so clearly Sunni Muslims? Clearly their Ashura has nothing to do with Hussein. But the Tatars celebrate it as a period of seriousness and reflection, almost as a kind of mourning, and they make a special fruit cocktail for that occasion. Another thing is what they call the azan. Azan, in Arabic, is the word for the call for prayer that you hear from the minaret. But for the Tatars, it is the name calling of a newborn. It's only that this ritual appears to be more Christian than Islamic. In Islam, the name of a newborn is whispered in the baby's ear. And the Tatars have a ceremony that is more like a Christian baptism, whereby the family gathers around the baby that is dressed in white cloth, and then the imam gives the baby its name.
There are more examples of traditions that seem to be copied from the Catholics. For instance, we have been told that they used to have a custom that on some occasions at least they would walk in a procession around the cemetery. And another example is a procession around the mosque, for example, with animal that will be slaughtered on the Islamic feast of sacrifice that the Tatars call Kubran Bayram. Or when they bury their dead, they give them, or at least used to give them, small sheets of paper with prayers written on them, just like the Catholics give their dead a rosary in their hands, and the imam would sprinkle the grave with water. And the Tatars who bury their dead on public cemeteries also visit them on All Saints' Day, and just like Catholic Poles burn candles and lay flowers on the graves of their loved ones. Some traditions are not related to Catholicism, but are specific for the Islam of the Tatars here. For instance, on the Feast of the Sacrifice, they usually slaughter a cow instead of a sheep. And the two oldest mosques in Poland, that is the wooden mosques here in Bohoniki and Kruszyniany, are called Polish Mecca and Medina, because Tatars for a long time have been unable to make the pilgrimage to the real Mecca and Medina in Saudi Arabia, so they came here instead, making processions around the mosques.
This is a typical case of what they call syncretism, that is the mixing of a religion with local beliefs. And that would not be so strange because the Tatars in this part of Europe were for hundreds of years isolated from the world of Islam. And they lived in the midst of Catholicism, Orthodox Christianity and Judaism. A Polish professor, Andrzej Drozd, who has studied the Tatars and their scriptures for a long time, has shown that Tatar manuscripts had taken large parts from the Old Polish Christian literature. This happened mostly in the 16th century when Poland was gripped by a radical Protestant movement, and this was apparently something that also affected the Tatars of that time. So they integrated quite some Christian motives and ideas into their own religious Islamic traditions. I find this fascinating, Have the Tatars so much been influenced by Catholicism that it changed their Islamic practices? For answers, I call Professor Drozd, who has made it his lifetime work to study Tatar texts. Professor Drozd, I'm so glad that I can talk to you because I have this question on my mind for a while now. You see, what I hear, what I read, what I see from the way that Tatar Muslims here in Poland practice their Islam, that looks to me, as an outsider, very Catholic. And could it be, and that's my question, could it be that the Tatar Muslims during the 7, almost 8 centuries that they lived here in the region, that they gradually lost their Islamic practices and replaced them for Catholic ones?
No, we cannot say at all that the Tatars lost their Islamic practices. Just opposite, in my opinion, the Tatars even strengthened their practice of Islam during the 600 years of their existence in the Christian state. It seems quite possible that the first settlers, the first newcomers from the Golden Horde in the 14th and 15th century, they were quite fresh Muslims. We should remember that the Islamization of Golden Horde had just happened 1, 2, maybe 3 generations before the settlement of the Tatars in the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. It was the 14th century. So it is quite possible that the first settlers were as a fresh Muslims. Their practice of Islam was still, we can say, maybe not full, but their Islam was still under influence of the pre-Islamic practices. And some of the pre-Islamic practices probably survived until the recent times, until the 20th century. I mean the healing of some mental illness, or possibly also other practices that we can see even contemporary in the practices of the Tatars. But we should not, I do not assume that the Christian practice influenced the Islamic practice of the Tatars.
This blew my mind. According to Professor Drozd, the Islam of the Tatars in this region was not influenced by Catholicism at all, but rather the opposite. These Tatars had maintained a pristine Islam, an Islam that their tribes had adopted centuries ago, and that was therefore perhaps still a bit mingled with old Tatar customs. And that mixture is what has been preserved over all these centuries until now, with very little, if any, influences from the Christian environment. These influences did play a role, Professor Drozd told me, on the level of theological scripture, when Tatar scholars started to study Christianity.
And the Tatars, what is very, I would say, crucial, they used the Old Polish anti-Trinitarian translation of the Bible, of the Old and New Testament. We call it Nieśwież Bible, which was translated by a very eminent biblical scholar, Szymon Budny, and edited and printed in Nieśwież, nowadays it is in Belarus, in 1572. So the Tatars used up this particular edition of the Bible, I would say quite rare edition. Until now, perhaps more than 20 copies are known all over the world. And one of these copies, which is preserved in Warsaw University Library, was used by the Tatars. The Tatars made comments on margins of this copy. They commented the biblical text. They compared this biblical translation with the Quran. So they tried to match the important parts of the Bible, of the Old Testament, with the Quran. Why? Because the biblical and Quranic history of this religious history of the world is more or less the same history. So
Yeah.
Tatars tried to find this what was common for them as a Muslims and for their neighbors, Christian neighbors. And this is this, I would say, special phenomenon of the Polish-Lithuanian Tatars.
But if it's very interesting, but you started off with saying, I make a distinction between the rituals and, well, let's call it more the theological doctrine. And what
Yes.
you described now is the theological doctrine. And you're saying that there is these influences also because they did comparative Bible studies and these kind of things. But in terms of the practices, you think there was no influence. They preserved the ways that they had ever since the 14th century. Is that right?
Yes, yes. On the level of dogmas, of religious doctrine, Tatars did not differ from the, I would say, classical, historical Islam in this old traditional form. The Christian influences were somewhere else on this level which I have just described, the level of the common history, finding the common history. The Tatars never abandoned, never denied any dogmas of Islam.
Okay, so the texts may speak for themselves, but how about their religious practices? How can Professor Drozd be so sure that those practices remained untouched throughout the centuries? I press on that question.
Just to continue the question of practices, you asked, what are the evidence? Well, this is very, I would say, difficult research, very complicated research. We are at the beginning. I mean, I'm at the beginning of this research. And why is it so difficult? Because we do not have much comparative studies which would provide us with a picture of relevant Islamic level of culture in the Islamic world.
No, exactly. And the only thing I could think of is what we know from people who have migrated. So the Dutch who went to South Africa, or people who went to Canada, or the French who went to Canada, that they actually, when the migrants preserve the customs from the country that they left, and the people who are left behind, they evolve in all kinds of ways, meaning that the migrating people preserve certain traditions that are still locked in time. Could that have been a similar situation from the Tatars?
We should remember that the Tatars migrated in 14th, 15th century. So it was 600 years ago. This is the period about which we do not know much. Especially, we do not know much about details of everyday religious practices.
So what does Professor Drozd base his claims on? Well, on texts. He has been studying prayer manuals that go back centuries. And his argument is that these manuals represented the daily practices of the Tatar Muslims. One last question. I just want to push you a little bit because of the practices. What we know, for instance, in the Balkans, where also Christians and Muslims live together, that especially under the influence of the Bektashi order, they had the so-called, what they call syncretic religion, so that Christianity and Islam was really, it became mixed. They used customs and traditions and rituals from both and created a kind of a mixture. Do I understand you correctly that you're saying, well, that did not happen, similar development did not happen in Poland? Could it have happened?
No, I think that the situation of the mass Islam in Balkans and in Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was quite different, because in Balkans, the Islam was, I would say, in some areas it was dominating. But in Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, the Tatars were not dominating community in any place. They were rather small little communities which rather tried to, I would say, preserve their Islamic identity and not to let this Islamic practice be interfered with the Christian customs Christian practices.
I'm intrigued by that work and the arguments of Professor Drozd, but I still need a bit more convincing. The texts that you found, that they actually date back all the way to the 15th century, means that those devotional texts and the customs that come with those texts have been preserved through those centuries?
It is possible. It is quite possible.
We are left with more questions than answers to who the Tatars are and what they believe. So I think we need to explore more. Not only try to meet the people, but also understand where we are. So I want us to explore the region more, and we are going sightseeing. This podcast was hosted by Maurits Berger and Ewa Górska. Sound editing by Tomasz Stankiewicz, tostanki.pl. Voiceover Natalia Orkisz-Plebanek and Zbigniew Lecznar. Music in this podcast series is by Ensemble Peregrinus, which recreated traditional Tatar music, and by the Arab artists Sabri Mosbah, Tamer Nafar, Ghalia, and Youssef Kehya.